All right, like I mentioned before, when we started World War II, many of you were familiar with what the Germans had done to the Jewish people. And some of you, I think, were surprised to learn that it wasn't just 6 million Jews, but it was 5 million others that were killed in the concentration camp, bringing that total to 11 million people that were killed in the concentration camps. We're not talking about soldiers here. We're talking about those that the Germans rounded up. I also introduced, probably most of you had never heard about Unit 731, the Japanese scientists and doctors, and of course the Nanking invasion, the massacre at Nanking. One thing I did promise, though, is listen, if there's ugly things that go on in war, which there always are ugly things that go on in war, we need to learn about those things. One of those things, now we're going to talk about a little bit of a dark side of the United States actions as well, too. These were called the Tokyo fire raids of World War II. Now, we will talk a little bit about the atomic bombs. We'll get to those. You're familiar with those, but there's probably a pretty good chance you haven't heard of the Tokyo fire raids of World War II. This right here is Curtis LeMay. He was the one that was in charge for the United States military in the Pacific. And LeMay, he actually stays in power for quite some time throughout the 1950s as well. Curtis LeMay, like I said, he was in charge of bombing strategies. He needed to break the Japanese will to continue to fight in World War II. There was only so many targets that he felt he could go after, but he wanted to break the spirit and the will of the Japanese people to continue to fight in World War II. Now, these Tokyo fire raids in 1945, Japanese civilians were being trained by their government to fight Americans if an invasion took place. They anticipated that an invasion was going to take place. So civilians as well as soldiers, they refused to surrender. They would commit suicides. This was something that our soldiers were seeing as they got closer and closer to the island of Japan, the main islands of Japan. Citizens on these smaller islands would instead of surrendering, they would commit suicide. This was going to be part of the culture of the time as well, too. In 1945, low-altitude missions began to try to break the Japanese will to fight. Now, these low-altitude raids, they weren't just regular bombs. Bombs of incendiary devices. These are basically bombs that will ignite and spread fire were being dropped. Now, Tokyo was built of homes made of wood and tar paper, so it really was just a matchbox waiting for somebody to strike that. These homes would provide the fuel for fire if it could be started. The results of these bombing, now these bombs were made of napalm, which probably, if you're familiar at all, that was used quite heavily in Vietnam. Again, this was a gel-like substance that when it was dropped, it would ignite. The results of these bombings were that an estimated 70 to 90,000 people were killed. Now, remember, these are not what were traditional military targets. These were dropped on cities where civilians lived, and the idea was to burn the cities down. If that happened, the will of the people would be broken. 1 million people, an estimated 1 million people, lost their homes. Some quote by LeMay it's rather chilling, but he said, every soldier thinks something of the moral aspects of what he's doing. But all war is immoral, and if you let that bother you, you're not a good soldier. Another quote attributed to him, if you kill enough of them, they'll stop fighting. And the last one, killing Japanese didn't bother me very much at that time. I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal. And no doubt, there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever, if Japan or Germany would have won that war, would have won World War II, LeMay would have been brought up as a war criminal, and I'm sure he would have been convicted and executed for his actions. Difficult history of the United States in World War II was the Tokyo fire bombings.